On October 8, 1969, Curt Flood, star center fielder for the St. Louis Cardinals, received a telephone call informing him that general manager Bing Devine had just traded him to the Philadelphia Phillies. Flood decided to sue Major League Baseball and Commissioner Bowie Kuhn on the grounds that the reserve clause, which bound players forever to a team unless they were traded or sold, was a violation of antitrust laws. Edmund P. Edmonds, in an article entitled "The Impact of Curt Flood's Minor League Baseball Experiences on His Lawsuit Against Bowie Kuhn," written in 2008, doesn't simply look at the case that he brings eventually to the Supreme Court, but looks at earlier conditions in Flood's experiences that molded him into being the man who would fight for free agency. Edmonds' methodology is to look at Flood's 2 years in the minor leagues in the Jim Crow South during 1956 and 57. He stayed in a boarding house versus the team hotel. He experienced racial slurs in the Carolina League. He uses primary sources like the New York Times, court records, Curt Flood's own autobiography, and other secondary sources about integration in baseball. And he concludes that even though Flood lost his quest, in 1975, 2 white ball players would win free agency as a result of Curt Flood's efforts. Abraham Kahn, in his book Curt Flood in the Media, Baseball, Race, and the Demise of Activist Athlete, written in 2012, gives a historical investigation of how the media portrayed Curt Flood and how race was a central part of this discussion, but it shifted over time into becoming more of a labor and economic discussion. Kahn begins with an analysis of Flood as an athlete activist, situates him in the social and cultural unrest of the 1960s. To Kahn, Flood's slaves weren't defined by racial identity, but by economic situation, that his lawsuit revealed a new reality. To do this, he uses primary sources, newspapers, magazines, African-American newspapers like the Baltimore Afro-American, secondary articles and books about athletes, about salaries. He concludes that Flood was willing to sacrifice his career and risk the wrath of major league owners for something in which he did not necessarily profit. He paved the way for the quote, economic modernization of the game. Stuart Weiss, in his book The Curt Flood Story, The Man Behind the Myth, written in 2007, reveals the real Curt Flood. Weiss gives a deep dive and even criticism at times of Curt Flood's personal life and habits. It is a biography that discusses Flood's childhood in Oakland all the way to his death in Los Angeles in 1997. He looks at the details of Curt Flood's life on and off the field, looks at the tragedies that he faced with his family along the way, and the role of Curt Flood's relationships. Flood was far from the stereotypical athlete. He highlights his talents as an artist and guitarist, as well as a baseball player. So this book doesn't necessarily just focus on the reserve clause or his battle with the Supreme Court, but what this book tries to do is highlight Flood's private side that the public didn't get to see. He uses interviews with former teammates, other professional ball players, newspapers like the Indianapolis Star, the Oakland Tribune. Weiss shows that Flood was human and shows some of the complicated, complex layers. But to me, he just highlights his humanity and shows that complicated people can do great things. These sources offer a specific St. Louis example of athletic activism and economic activism. And though it is toward the end of my period of study, it offers me a specific example of progress made by the activism of the era, and also gives me another window through which to view the intersection of sports, race, economics, and culture, both in the 1960s and in St. Louis specifically.